We started with an ugly empty hole in this bedroom, so I'm showing you everything it'll take to make my wife's dream closet. So I started with a standard size closet with a small opening, and because this wasn't a load bearing wall, I decided to tear the whole thing down. With the space opened up, we were finally able to lay the rest of these engineered hardwood floors, and yeah, I'm working barefoot because I can finally feel comfortable walking barefoot in my own home. And with this large opening, we decided to custom make 2 oversized doors to make this closet feel as spacious as possible. So we start with a few 2x4s around the head and jambs to strengthen the opening. So we used regular size wood screws for the 2x4s, and then the primed white pieces are tacked on afterwards on top with liquid nails and a nail gun to make the visible casing that we will soon paint. Then the fun part was custom making 2 door panels to fit perfectly in the space and add some character to the bedroom. We started by designing a door with 2 openings, each made to hold different types of panels. First, we built the frames out of wood, ensuring everything was square and precise. Then we decided to tack on a simple wood panel for the bottom part of the door because the upper part will be occupied by our focal point, which is coming soon. But first, we're going to stain the whole thing with dark walnut, which is one of my favorite colors. Then this is where we decided to try something new by experimenting with cane material. We love how it adds the natural texture and warmth, and if you want more details on how we made these, you can check out other videos we made that break down each step of the process. We finally got the doors hung and we were really happy with how they turned out, but now it was time to figure out what's going to happen inside. So the doors helped open the space up, but the size itself hadn't gotten any bigger. So my wife asked me, how are we going to fit all our clothes in here? So to her surprise, I said, I'll use the closet in the guest bedroom as my space, and I'm going to make your dream closet here in this room. So how do I even get started on a project like this? First step is to ask what is all needed in this closet. We obviously need a rod for hanging clothes, drawers for folding clothes, socks and underwear, shelves for shoes. So I typically divide these spaces out into sections and make revisions as I go. Eventually we end up with a sketch like this where she'll have 2 separate rods on each side, a shoe shelf on the bottom left, drawers in the middle, and an additional rod for longer dresses on the right side. The next step is to grab my tape measure, take a few measurements of the empty space, then draw it up on my computer. I use a free version of SketchUp to draw it all out, and this is where the design becomes real. This drawing is super important because I'm going to use the exact measurements on this drawing for the actual built-in that we make. And if it looks confusing, let me explode this drawing by breaking it into separate sections to show you how I'll make it one part at a time. So with my exploded drawing having everything separated out, it's easy to see exactly what materials I need for this project. For built-in cabinets like this, I typically use sheets of plywood to make the sides and shelves. Then I'll use strips of select pine because it's cheaper than other hardwood. These are typically 1x2s. Then I'll use thicker strips for 1x8s and 1x6s to make the drawer sides. Then a thin panel for the drawer bottoms. I also need to get a wood closet rod, drawer guides, and I always choose the soft close hardware. It's worth a few extra bucks. Then don't forget the drawer pulls, but I got a surprise for that. Once everything is purchased and now it's time to cut all the wood to the sizes I need, the 2 main saws I'll need to make all these cuts are a miter saw for my strips, which are the 1x2s and 1x6s and 8s. And the miter saw is really simple to use because its one function is to cut wood to length. Then a table saw to rip down all the sheets of wood that make up the cabinet shelves and sides. I closely referenced my drawing and the dimensions I captured very closely for each cut. And I really like using a table saw because I can easily set my fence to determine the width of the panel that is needed, and I can make multiple cuts because there are a lot of repeated cuts in this project. But also because I plan on setting the shoe shelves at an angle, I can also rotate my saw blade 10 degrees in a direction so that way it can connect to the face frame of the cabinet just like I drew it up. I can typically make all my cuts with just these 2 saws for most basic projects, but for this project I'm going to use a handheld jigsaw and a hole saw for a few special cuts. One of these cuts will essentially help me make a loop to hold the closet rod. And another special cut I need to make is a dado for the drawer boxes, but that can also be done with my table saw, but more on that later. Once everything is cut, the next part is figuring out how to attach them to each other. So my favorite method is using pocket holes because it allows me to drill holes on the underneath side of a piece of wood and screw it to another piece of wood, which results in no screws being visible. It's very efficient and a strong way to connect 2 pieces together. But it's not used in every instance, so sometimes I need to get creative with how I connect 2 pieces of wood together, but the goal for me is to always hide any fasteners if possible, especially for a finished piece of furniture like this built-in. And sometimes, like for this cabinet side, I'm using wood glue paired with small nails to hold the drawer brackets. And you can see my computer is always there to make sure I'm putting things in the correct spot. There's also always other little details to consider, like cutting out a notch to perfectly fit around the baseboards that we just installed in this closet, but also sanding off the little stickers that come with the plywood when you purchase it. And now that the drawer cabinets are ready, let's go ahead and talk about drawers. My beautiful wife asked me to make her 4 drawers for her dream closet, so I have 20 pieces here to make that happen. Let's work on one at a time. For these drawers, I notched out a little pole, and let me show you how I made this. So instead of using a typical drawer hardware pole, I'm going going to use my jigsaw to notch out a hand-sized slot to make an opening to pull the drawer boxes open. The jigsaw is the perfect tool to use to make custom cuts like this, then to round out the corners of the drawer faces to make them a little more user-friendly. I'm using a router to create a nice round edge. And because the router never makes a perfect cut, I always smooth down all the corners with a little bit of sandpaper. So to put the four sides together, I'm going to use pocket holes, and let me show you how that's done. I use my pocket jig and clamp it in, make sure my drill depth is set correctly. And I'm going to use 2 pocket holes for each corner. So I have 8 pocket holes drilled for the 4 corners, but before I put them all together, I need to get rid of these little fuzzies on the end of each piece. So I just need to lightly touch all the corners. Sanding the wood helps remove splinters, but also improves the overall appearance of each joint. The corners look good, so now I'm going to use 1.25" screws for these 3/4 inch thick pieces. Also, I put the pocket holes on the outside of the corner because that makes it much stronger. One corner done, and you can see I made this dado cut in here, so that way you can slide the panel in like so. A dado cut is referred to as a groove cut into a piece of wood, so another piece of wood can fit within that space cut out. There is drawer number 1. And if I wanted to conceal these pocket holes here, take a little bit of glue, they make these pocket hole plugs that I can just slide right into place. They work really well. And things may never look perfect after I put everything together, so that's why I use wood filler to fill little holes that are visible at each joint. Then I make sure I sand it down really well so that way it matches the appearance of the rest of the wood surface. But let's dive into a brief overview of what it takes to sand wood in preparation for the finish. First, I need to remove splinters from the piece of wood I cut from my wife's closet, so I typically use 3 different levels of sandpaper. The large/80 grit is for removing major imperfections, but I mostly only need a medium/180 grit to smooth down small splinters created from my saws. Then once all imperfections are taken care of, I switch out the sandpaper with a 240 grit to make it smooth and ready to stain. And after that, we're ready to pick out a stain color for her closet. And the last step before we assemble everything in that closet is staining. I could always leave it as its natural color, but by soaking the wood with a stain not only alters the color, but still preserves the grain of the wood unlike a paint. So that's why old people freak out when someone paints over a nice piece of real furniture. And in some cases, I am one of those people. So here's how we did that. I take a couple of cotton rags from old t-shirts, mix the stain well, use gloves to protect my hands from being stained, and I use longer strokes to prevent too much stain from soaking into certain parts of the wood. It's good to avoid making splatters because it can cause the color to be uneven. Today we decided to stain this with Ipswich Pine from Midwax. This lighter color is perfect for a closet because it keeps it light while still giving it a finished look. Once everything is stained, I place each piece to dry so that way an important side isn't facing down and touching any surfaces to throw off the color of the wood. It can be overwhelming staining this many pieces of wood in one setting, but I still use all the same principles. 1, making sure I'm working in a well-ventilated area, and 2, I have plenty of storage racks to allow everything to dry. And whenever we're done staining, we make sure we let the cotton rags air out to dry because they are flammable and could spontaneously combust. And once the rags are dry, I typically put them in an empty metal container, and an empty stain can is perfect for that. Next, I need to make sure the wood is protected by placing a clear finish on it. So I'm using polyurethane. This will create a layer to protect the wood from moisture, stains, and even scratches. And because I used a lighter stain color, I like pairing it with a semi-gloss finish. Just my preference. A semi-gloss finish will slightly darken the wood and make it more shiny, which gives it a more polished look. So to apply this, I thoroughly stir the polyurethane, dip a fresh brush into the can, and brush it on all the surfaces with as few strokes as possible. I'm going to place 1 coat on each surface, and it's important to apply this on horizontal surfaces because if I try brushing onto vertical surfaces, it will leave many more streaks. And if that happens, that's okay. I'll wait several hours to allow it to cure, then lightly sand all the surfaces to knock off the little bumps and streaks I created before placing on a second coat. It's good to not use any power tools because I don't want to over sand. And when I put a second coat on, I'll let it cure again, and tomorrow we can assemble these pieces into her closet. At first, my wife did not want the shoe shelves to be angled like they are, but I told her, trust me, you're gonna like it this way. So I kind of went against her wishes, so I'm taking a risk, but I think it'll pay off in the end. So to put together the shoe shelves, I had to create brackets for each side of the shelves. I used liquid nails and screws into the studs to make a strong connection to the wall. Then I used a similar process to install a bracket on the wall to hold the clothes rod and the overhead shelf above. So we decided to assemble the center cabinet on the floor, and the pocket holes allowed me to place the screws on the underneath side of each shelf. So that way they weren't visible, so while I did that, Gabby attached the drawer slides on the bottom half of this cabinet. Once we lifted it into place, that's when we start to get very excited about seeing the finished product. Once the cabinet was built and all the brackets were installed onto the wall, we could easily lift the overhead shelf into place, and it all came together very quickly. The overhead shelf would be supported by the cabinet on the center and the brackets on each side from the walls. Then I secured the top shelf to the center cabinet so that way everything is stable. It's starting to look exactly like the way I drew it, right? And the more progress we made, the more excited she got. Then using those custom wood loops I created and the wood clothes rod, I was able to easily attach those into place, and I think that seamlessly fit very well in with the rest of the design. Once the brackets were in place, the shoe shelf came together very quickly, other than the fact that I realized our closet wasn't square, so I had to shave down the corners of the shoe shelves to fit properly. And because this cabinet is 2 feet deep, I decided to add a notch in the middle of the shoe shelves, so that way she could have a front row and a back row of the shoes on each shelf, which doubles her shoe storage. And that is almost the entire cabinet made primarily out of plywood. But to conceal those plywood edges, we used those 1x2s to create a face frame using pocket holes to make the cabinet look much better. And again, the goal is to always make this piece with no fasteners being visible in the end, and the pocket holes make that possible. And for each piece that I attach, I always use a clamp to make sure the surfaces of each wood piece are flush with each other, because when everything aligns with each other, that greatly improves the overall appearance of the shelf. And with most of the face frame assembled, we were able to attach it to the rest of the built-in using a couple of the pocket holes I had already created and a few finish nails that can easily be concealed. And this built-in is very close to being finished. Finally, it's time to install the drawers, and if my measurements are all correct, meaning I allowed a 1/2 inch gap on the left and right side of each drawer to allow space for the metal drawer slides, then it's as simple as making sure the drawers are sitting at the correct height and spaced out evenly from one to the next, so I can install each drawer box one at a time. I also made sure to leave plenty of height beneath the bottom drawer to act as a toe kick, and also we could vacuum and regularly clean underneath that drawer when it's all done. And there is nothing more satisfying than sliding them all closed when everything is installed. I can't believe how far this space has come in the last few weeks, and I know my wife is super excited to move in, and if you made it to the end of this video, that means you might like a lot of the other videos that I've made, so thank you for watching. I hope you subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you for the next project.